US and China are at war over computer chips. The US is trying to stop China from getting American chip technology, but it's not so easy to do. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. The US and China are in a war to see who will reign supreme in technology, specifically semiconductors, also called microchips. Our lives are dependent on these chips, for everything from our smartphones to cars to Roombas, and of course, this actual smart egg tray that connects your phone and warns you when you're running low on eggs. Yes, you could live without it. But would you even want to? That's why U.S. President Joe Biden has signed the CHIPS Act to promote domestic U.S. semiconductor production. The U.S. currently leads the world in microchip technology, specifically the software that allows microchips to get made. But the U.S. sells that software to other countries. The U.S. only manufactures about 10% of the world's microchips. Nearly all the rest are made in South Korea, Japan, Taiwan, and increasingly, China. China is catching up because the Communist Party has a nationwide strategy to outcompete the U.S. when it comes to technology. It's part of their Made in China 2025 plan. Yes, they're so serious about it, they actually made a logo for it. The U.S. government is worried because in addition to egg trays, microchips can also be used in things like missiles that can be used to take over Taiwan, and artificial intelligence that can keep the entire world under surveillance and control. And yet, for years, American companies have been selling microchips to China, as well as technology that allows Chinese companies to make their own microchips. Why? Because money. This is like Bugs Bunny selling Elmer Fudd bullets in exchange for carrots. Not the smartest move, Doc. But now Biden wants to do something about that. He's been halting chip sales from going to China and expanding policies to chip away at China's chip industry. Last week, the Biden administration imposed 2 new rules to hobble China's chip industry, especially Chinese advanced supercomputers and semiconductors. The rules limit U.S. companies from exporting critical chip manufacturing tools to China and prohibits American citizens and companies from providing support to Chinese companies involved in advanced chip manufacturing. Oh, come on, how is Bugs Bunny supposed to get carrots now if he can't sell the nice Hunter bullets? Even non-U.S. companies are affected. The Biden administration is using what's known as the Foreign Direct Product Rule. That's the same rule President Trump had used to cripple Chinese telecom company Huawei. The idea is if a company anywhere in the world wants to continue using U.S. technology to make microchips, then those companies won't be allowed to sell chips to China without getting a U.S. license first. This goes hand in hand with Biden's move to add 31 Chinese companies and universities to the unverified list, and 28 Chinese companies and military organizations to the entity list. China's largest producer of memory chips, Yangtze Memory Technologies Corp., is among those put on the unverified list. Companies are added to the unverified list because the United States could not complete on-site visits to determine whether they can be trusted to receive sensitive technology exports from the United States. So it's like a naughty list. Biden is just like Santa Claus. According to this new policy, if a government, like China, prevents U.S. officials from conducting checks at these unverified companies, then the U.S. will put the companies on the entity list. Those on the entity list would have to get a license to buy U.S. products, like I mentioned earlier. This is already having an impact. Chinese chip stocks are tumbling after the new rules, and Chinese state-run media is foaming at the mouth, calling it the most savage attack on free trade. The most savage attack on free trade. More than the CCP's threats to put a naval blockade on Taiwan? Apparently the CCP is a monarchy because it's run by a bunch of drama queens. They're especially upset because they know there's more where this comes from. The new rules are just the first of a series of expected actions from the Biden administration and Congress before the end of the year. Many say the new rules are a step in the right direction and a long time coming. And this will set the Chinese back years. And this has left China wondering what they can do to get onto Mr. Claus's nice list. But all these rules will only have an impact if they're actually enforced. And that's the problem. I'll explain after the break. Welcome back. So the U.S. government makes certain companies get a license to buy U.S. technology. That's supposed to keep U.S. tech from falling into the wrong hands. But the fact that there is a license also means that these companies can just get a license. This raises a lot of eyebrows because the U.S. Commerce Department has a reputation of putting commercial interests ahead of national security. In the past, it has approved licenses for nearly all tech exports, which would be surprising if it weren't for the fact that it's the Commerce Department. Commerce is like their whole thing. It's like being shocked that the U.S. Hamburger Department prioritizes making sliders over keeping cows safe. But according to one senior administration official, most special licenses will be denied now, though certain shipments to facilities operated by U.S. companies or allied countries will be evaluated case by case. The fact that there's already moves to make exceptions to the export controls is concerning. It's like saying we need to quarantine anyone who's been bitten by a zombie, except you three. Do whatever you like. How could this ever come back to literally bite us? So far, it looks like the U.S. is already planning to make exceptions for two South Korean companies, Samsung and SK Hynix. On the one hand, South Korea is joining the Chip 4 Alliance, a U.S. government initiative for a semiconductor industry alliance with Japan, South Korea, and Taiwan that specifically excludes China. On the other hand, South Korea is establishing a new collaborative supply chain council with China to address disruptions to their economic ties. South Korea is trying to have their cake and eat it too, then put the leftover cake in the fridge next to the smart egg dish that uses chips made in China. South Korea has a lot of vested interests in keeping a neutral ground in the U.S.-China chip war. There's a lot at stake for them. In 2021, almost 40% of South Korea's semiconductor exports went to China. And some South Korean companies have their chip production based in China. So South Korea is talking about joining the Chip 4 Alliance to exclude China, but also working with China. This has big, just because I'm getting married doesn't mean we can't keep dating energy to it. And even if allies like South Korea decide to abide by the new U.S. export rules, the U.S. has other things to worry about as well, playing whack-a-mole with new Chinese companies. One of them is Pengxingwei IC Manufacturing, based in Shenzhen. According to Bloomberg, this chip startup may help Huawei circumvent U.S. sanctions. It's run by a former Huawei executive and is constructing facilities close to Huawei's headquarters. Totally not conspicuous. That'd be like if Captain Crunch lost his cereal making license, so he started selling cereal under the name Admiral Chomp. It's a totally different product, I swear. This could help Huawei regain ground in several critical areas, like smartphones and servers. It's already drawn attention from U.S. regulators, but it's not clear whether Pengxingwei explicitly violates U.S. trade sanctions. We'll have to keep a close eye on it. Hopefully, the Commerce Department doesn't see it and say, "Oh, how much do you want for that sweet Trojan horse?" And now it's time for me to answer a question from a China Uncensored viewer who's part of the 50 Cent Army. That's the group of fan who supports us directly through Patreon or locals. S.R. Hayden asks, "Hey Chris, fellow NYU alum here. Out of all your episodes of General Hostility, I'm still confused. What exactly is the difference between Zemin and Jinping? What is the difference in governing philosophy/political ideologies? Can you give us a segment detailing the point-by-point difference in these two camps? I know they're rotten commies, but on the ground in China, what's the difference between the two that creates the general hostility?" Good question. Go NYU. Except for the massive student debt and ties to China. Anyway, the main thrust of general hostility is not that Jiang Zemin and Xi Jinping have huge political or ideological differences. The point is, they're competing for power. And whoever loses will go to prison for the rest of his life, if he's lucky. That's just the way it works in communist societies. There can't be two tigers on the mountain. That being said, they do have a few policy differences. For example, Jiang Zemin built up his power base through the persecution of Falun Gong. It was his excuse to build up China's internal security forces, which were loyal to him personally. Xi Jinping, on the other hand, built up his power through persecuting Uyghurs, several other groups, and now also through COVID policy. It's his excuse to build up China's mass surveillance, which allows him to control society. General hostility is about the current dictator and the former dictator competing for power. And if someday a third person wins general hostility, you can be sure that he'll build up his power through some other horrible persecution. Because as long as the Chinese Communist Party rules China, no matter who wins the power struggle at the top, the people of China at the bottom will lose. Thanks for your question, S.R. Hayden. And thank you to everyone who supports the show. Be like S.R. Hayden, support China Uncensored by going to patreon.com/China Uncensored and contributing $1 or more per episode. As one of the perks, you can ask me questions that I'll answer on the show. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.